Vi aŭskultas la radioprogramon Sono de Edioj de Ediestream Public Media. Mi estas Stephanie Haney. Dankon pro via restado kun ni. What I just said to you was something very close to You're with the Sound of Ideas from IdeaStream Public Media. I'm Stephanie Haney. Thank you for staying with us. Now, you might not have understood it because I was speaking Esperanto. Esperanto was created in the late 1800s, meant to be a universal secondary language. It's not tied to any particular region in the world, so it has no native speakers, and it's not intended to be anyone's first language. It's meant to be easy to learn no matter what your background, and its goal is to promote international communication and even world peace. That is a lot of opportunity there for the language of Esperanto. It's encouraged here in the United States by a nonprofit organization called Esperanto USA, which is hosting a week-long course, and its national conference at Cleveland State University, now through July 6th. Today, we have leaders of Esperanto USA and a Cleveland member joining us to teach us about the language and its Northeast Ohio connection, and hopefully help us walk away knowing a few key phrases. So here with me today, we have Brandon Sowers, who is the president of Esperanto USA. Hi, Brandon.
Hi, hello.
Also with us, we have Amanda Schmidt, executive director of Esperanto USA. Welcome, Amanda.
Saluton.
And we also have with us Jeremy Genovese, Beechwood resident and member of Esperanto USA. Jeremy, thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for bringing this topic of conversation to us today. We appreciate
pleasure.
it. If you want to be a part of this conversation, you can give us a call at 866-578-0903. You can also email us at soi@ideastream.org, or you can message us on Instagram at The Sound of Ideas. Brandon, can you tell us about the origin of Esperanto? We know it was created in 1887. What prompted this creation of a whole new language?
Right, so it was created by a Jewish-Polish eye doctor in what's now Poland, what was then part of the Russian Empire. And his goal was to create something that would be a second language that anybody could learn, with the idea that this would help people to basically overcome boundaries. So he grew up in a city where there was at least 4 languages that were spoken, and there was a lot of ethnic conflict. And so he wanted to create something that could be what he called a universal language, meaning it's for anybody, for any purpose, and that at least would overcome one boundary that people have, right? It's also important to kind of think about the context. This was a time when telegraph was expanding, when rail networks were expanding. So very much there was this idea of universality in the air. It's also like 25 years after soccer was formalized, right? Which we now consider the universal sport. So it's really in this period. And it goes from there and pretty much spreads around the world. There were other people trying to create languages at the same time. And this is the one that kind of caught on, it was spread to France, to China, Japan, Brazil, the U.S., all within just a couple of years.
Okay. And there is a Cleveland connection a few decades later. Jeremy, can you tell me about that? The creator's daughter dating back to the 1930s. Please explain that to us.
Yes, so Zamenhof's daughter, Lydia Zamenhof, was invited to come to Cleveland to teach Esperanto. She came to the city and taught in a number of locations here. And I guess I should say that there was a large Esperanto community here in Cleveland at that time. I recently found out, for example, that Shaker Heights High School had an Esperanto club at the high school. There were Esperanto clubs across the city in East Cleveland and Cleveland Heights. And this was a time in Cleveland when there were many ethnic newspapers, many people spoke many languages. So Esperanto had a lot of traction here. So Lydia Zamenhof came here to teach Esperanto. She came on a tourist visa, and she was welcomed in Esperanto, got a lot of coverage in the local newspapers. But the story has a tragic end because she was not allowed to stay in the United States when eventually was forced to leave and go back to Poland, where she was murdered by the Nazis at Treblinka.
Very sorry to hear that. That is a very tragic end to that story. If we can go back to the Cleveland connection to Esperanto here, Brandon, I know that the National Conference of Esperanto USA has returned here now. It's not the first time it's been in Cleveland. Can you tell us about some of the times that it's been here in the past as the national organization in support of this language?
Sure, so there's 2 in particular that we are very interested in kind of re-exploring the history of. In 1924, we held a conference here, and it was held in the Hotel Cleveland, which was newly built at the time. So we're actually going to have a dinner there later this week, kind of to commemorate that. And then also in 1938, we held a conference here, and that was while Lydia Zamenhof was in town. So she actually addressed the conference at that time. We've also held a conference in Lima, Ohio, for example, in the past. So we're very excited to kind of come back and explore this history. As an organization, we're actually turning 75 next year. So we're kind of preparing for our own jubilee and want to take that time to explore our history as well.
And Amanda, let's talk a little bit about what it means to be the executive director of Esperanto USA. What does that look like in a day-to-day scenario? That's a full-time job from what I understand. So what kinds of things is Esperanto USA doing to promote this language?
Well, we have a lot of different things that we're managing. So we have about 500 members across the country. And I do all of the administrative work, financial work, and managerial work. We have a number of contractors that work with us. We have a graphic designer, we have a magazine editor, we have a quarterly magazine that we produce. We have a film festival that we run every year, which is an opportunity for people to create short films in Esperanto that are, 4 or 5 minutes long with at least 10 Esperanto words in them, but they're not intended only for Esperanto speakers. They're for anyone in the general public that wants to make a short film and compete. And there are cash prizes for that. So let's see, what else?
That's quite a bit already.
Yeah, we're doing a lot. Yeah.
A lot going on, lots of events. Of course, you've got the event that you're here in town for here in Cleveland. Brandon, I want to ask you a bit about what's happening with Esperanto today. Are there exciting developments that we should be aware of? Are we speaking Esperanto at the World Cup?
So that's a good question. I've been following the World Cup very closely, and we actually just recently got a message from a Esperanto magazine and radio program in China asking to contact Esperantists in the US, Canada, and Mexico to talk about their experience of the World Cup. So I'm going to be responding to that. We have a member of our organization who's also Mexican who'll be responding from his perspective, and we're sharing it with our Canadian Esperantist friends as well. And so that's kind of one of the interesting things about Esperanto is it allows that direct connection, right, where you can say, here's how it's, I'm experiencing this as someone in the US or, Mexican in the US, right, watching my team and maybe supporting the US as well. And really getting that very direct connection there. And I think that speaks also to kind of how international Esperanto is, but at the same time very well connected, right? So I've never met the people producing that program in China, but I'm probably 1 or 2 degrees separated from them.
So it's a big, small world in the Esperanto community, it
Right.
sounds like. Very interesting. I'll ask each of you now if you can tell us just briefly how you came to be involved with Esperanto, how it piqued your interest. And Jeremy, I'll start with you.
Sure. So I first heard about Esperanto when I was a kid, when I was a teenager. So I've always been interested in it. It always sounded like a really good idea to me and kind of followed the movement. But about 7 years ago, close to the time I retired, I said, well, this is the time to throw myself into it and really try to learn the language.
When you have disagreements with people in your life who don't speak Esperanto, do you find yourself speaking Esperanto at them? You can be a little
That's an
unfiltered.
interesting suggestion. Maybe I'll take that up.
How about for you, Amanda? What is it that brought you to Esperanto?
Well, when I was in college in Illinois, the Spanish professor on the side would teach Esperanto every once in a while. So I took a little intro course, and it clicked. Like, it worked like a puzzle. All of the grammatical elements were so streamlined and easy that compared to French, which I'd learned in high school, it was a breeze. And so it really intrigued me. And then I went to the immersion course, the summer immersion course that we're running this summer in Cleveland. It used to be 3 weeks long, now it's a week long. And I was hooked because I met people from all over the world. I met people from Japan and Hungary and Australia and Poland and Argentina and lots of different places. And it was so fascinating to meet people directly and be able to speak to them without, them speaking my language or me speaking their language. We came together in a neutral way. So.
Okay. And how about for you, Brandon? What brought you to Esperanto?
So I found it when I was in high school, just browsing Wikipedia, saw something about it, and I followed the rabbit hole, and I kept with it. I, checked out a book from the library back when, that was the way to do it. I met people in my local club in Atlanta, Georgia at the time, and I started speaking Esperanto with them, or trying to, and they brought me along. And then I actually went to the same kind of immersion course that Amanda mentioned that we're doing here in Cleveland. And since then, I've had years where I use it a lot, and then other times where I don't touch it for a while, and then I come back to it. And I came back to it in 2019, and then, when the pandemic hit, it was kind of a lifeline, a way to stay connected with people around the world, hear how they're experiencing that, that time period. And since then, I've seen the kind of a resurgence that we've had in the US with it, and seeing, where we can go from here. And we're getting into publishing now, so I think there's a lot of opportunities.
Let me ask you this, Brandon. Esperanto sounds like a Spanish word, but we have learned here today that it stems from a Jewish-Polish creator. So any insight into how Esperanto came to be the name of this language?
Yeah, so he named himself Doctoro Esperanto, and in Esperanto that means someone who's hopeful, a hopeful person. And very quickly, he didn't name the language Esperanto, but very quickly people called it, the language of Esperanto, and then they just called it Esperanto. The sound, I like to say, it's very similar to Spanish or Italian, and a lot of the root words, are in common with Spanish or Italian or other Romance languages. But the sounds are also very common with, for example, Japanese, similar vowels, similar consonants. So that's why it sounds like it could be a Spanish word or an Italian word. Sometimes I joke and say it's like the one Romance language that you don't know.
Interesting. If you're just joining us here on The Sound of Ideas, we are talking about the language of Esperanto, which I've just learned means hope.
Hopeful person.
Hopeful person. This is a language that's intended to be a secondary language in order to bridge international communication, and their national conference is happening right here in Cleveland here in the coming days. If you want to be a part of this conversation, the number is 866-578-0903. You can also send us an email at soi@ideastream.org, or you can send us a message on Instagram at The Sound of Ideas. Now, Amanda, you are the executive director of Esperanto USA, which suggests there are other national organizations that support Esperanto. Can you give us an idea? How many people do we think in the world are speaking Esperanto? Do you have any context that you can share in that regard?
It's very difficult to judge that. Like, do you judge someone who just dabbled in it and, did a few lessons on Duolingo, or do you only count the people that are completely fluent? So in my experience, I've probably met, 500 people that speak Esperanto in my life, doing a lot of traveling and going to multiple events and things like that. But there are many, many more that I've not met. So it's a big enough community that you cannot know everyone, but you can know enough people that it's it feels like a family.
And Jeremy, can you tell us a bit about, you shared with me that you have met people internationally, virtually through Esperanto. Tell
Yes.
us what that's been like.
So the internet has been a real lifeline for Esperanto and has really helped revive the language. And so one of the great joys is that I'm able to participate in online meetings on Zoom or other platforms. Every day, literally, there are online meetings, and I get to talk to Esperantists from all over the world. I think the most interesting experience I had was I was in a call. So these people just jump on these calls and speak Esperanto. And one day I'm on a call, and somebody from Iran, another person from Egypt, another person from Israel, all Esperanto speakers, all had a conversation with each other. And I was thinking, like, Esperanto, this is the only place where something like this can happen. So it's a real sense of being part of a worldwide community and discovering common interests or common humanity across limits.
We hear all the time that our capacity for learning new language is stronger when we're younger. Jeremy, for you, you came to this later in life. You said about 7 years ago when you had retired. Can you tell us, what is it about this language that makes it so easy to pick up?
So the language is easy for a couple of reasons. One, it's completely regular. It has completely regular verbs. Anybody who's struggled over complex verb conjugations can learn to conjugate all the Esperanto verbs in just 5 or 6 minutes. The parts of speech are all marked, and it has this wonderful system of affixes, which allow you to create new words. So, for instance, we have the prefix mal, which immediately turns the word that it precedes into its opposite. So if lumo is light, mal lumo is dark. And by using some tricks like that, it enormously decreases the amount of vocabulary learning that you need to do. And I guess I also say that for those of us who are older, one of the best ways to be cognitively engaged is to learn a new language, and Esperanto is a great candidate for that.
Okay, well, let's try to learn a little bit of Esperanto here today. Amanda, Jeremy's given us a couple of details there. We've got a couple sentences that I want to work through here. Are there any basics you'd like to let us know before I ask you how to help us pronounce these sentences?
Absolutely. So I have some visual aids here. So Esperanto has some special letters with little hats, circumflexes over them. And those have particular pronunciations. So the one with the C with the hat is pronounced ch, just like in choo-choo train or whatever.
Okay.
J is like in giraffe. Ch, like in loch, like the Spanish word for lake. Je, like in measure, like the S in measure.
That's a J with a little hat on it.
Yep.
Okay.
S with a hat is sh. And U with a little, like we call it a hook, is like a W sound.
Okay.
So, like, for example, the word Europa means European. So this little phrase says, Ceja, Shalo, estas Europa agrablajo. So it's pronounced very similar to a lot of European languages. All of the vowels are A, E, I, O, U, just like in Spanish, French, Italian.
And what is that sentence in English?
This means Czech, like a scarf, is a European delight.
A scarf is a European delight?
Yeah, so it's just a sentence that I made up to demonstrate the.
Okay. Well, a scarf is a European delight. I spent some time living abroad. They said a scarf is the
Agreed.
key to warmth.
Yep.
We should
absolutely.
probably embrace them more here in the
Yeah.
States, if you want my opinion. And what do we have here? What are the
So
tips we'll learn on this fact sheet?
This is just showing what Jeremy was talking about, where there's word parts that you can put together. So Esperanto is an agglutinative language. So this word is kun vojaĝanto.
And can you remind us what agglutinative means?
Oh yeah, agglutinative means that you basically, there's little word bits that you can glue together. So
Okay.
you have your word root like voyage. You can add the prefix kun, which means with. You can add the affix ant, which means someone who is doing the verb in the sentence. And then o means noun. So kun vojaĝanto means traveling companion. And then there are also words in Esperanto that aren't quite translatable because the agglutinative nature of Esperanto means that you can create words with the word elements that don't exist in your native language. So for example, kun vojaĝemo is one word that can only in English be described by a phrase like the tendency or the love of traveling with others. So
it creates a simplified way to express a broader idea
right.
with Esperanto.
Yep.
Okay, so we've got a couple key phrases here that we'll try to at least mimic the pronunciation of. And if you are watching us on video, we have some graphics on the screen to help along with the visual piece of this. The first is probably a key sentence here. Do you speak Esperanto? So Amanda, please guide me through the pronunciation of this.
Sure. So the first word is ĉu vi parolas Esperanton?
Ĉu vi parolas Esperanton?
Wow, very good.
I'm like a parrot. Okay, great. So now we know where we're starting from. Baseline, when you're walking around Cleveland over the next 10 or so days, by the way, because Esperanto USA is in town through, is it July 7th?
Yes, July 7th.
Through July 7th, you may come upon some people who are speaking Esperanto. You can start with that. Okay, next phrase we have here in English. Thanks, friend. Amanda, please.
Dankon, amico.
Dankon, amico. Thanks,
Very
friend.
nice. Good
Great.
job.
Okay, we'll put this on repeat. Now, this could be very important in many situations. We have a phrase here. Excuse me, where is the bathroom? That could be very important. Let's see that graphic. There we go. We have that up on the screen for our visual audience members. Please, Amanda.
Pardonu, kie estas la necesejo?
Oh, this one's getting a little more tricky. Okay. Pardonu, kie estas la neceseo?
Very close.
Okay.
Excellent.
Necesiteo. Is that what it
So
was?
the C is pronounced like a TS sound.
Okay.
Necesejo.
Neceseo. Okay.
And the J is like a Y sound.
Okay, so excuse me, where's the bathroom? Let's hear that again, Amanda, from you properly.
Pardonu, kie estas la necesejo?
That was very quick. I will leave it at that. That was great. Thank you so much, Amanda. Now, I did hear, and Brandon, I'll ask you to help me out on this one, that there's a popular phrase about dining choices among the people who speak Esperanto. That is, where can I find an inexpensive vegan restaurant? So I'm going to ask you to pronounce that sentence for us, and then I need to hear the backstory on this.
Yeah. Kie eblas trovi malmultekostan veganan restauracion?
Okay, I'm going to ask you to say that again, please.
Kie eblas trovi malmultekostan veganan restoracion?
Kie eblas trovi malmultekostan veganan restauracion?
Very good.
Nice.
Okay, great. Where can I find an inexpensive vegan restaurant? Now, why is that so popular among the people who speak Esperanto?
Well, it's kind of a joking phrase that we use sometimes. Definitely not all Esperantists are vegans or vegetarians, but there is a healthy trend, I would say. For example, Jeremy and I are both vegans. I think we asked for a show of hands recently at the conference, and it was probably 20% of the people there were vegan. So it's there's a big Venn diagram there.
Okay.
And so we jokingly say, it's very useful when you're traveling to an Esperanto event in another country. You might not know. So in some countries, it might be hard to find, vegan or vegetarian restaurant, and sometimes you're maybe in a more expensive country. So it's very useful to ask a local Esperantist to have that phrase in your back pocket.
Sure. All right, great. We've got about a minute here. I want to make sure people can know where they can find out more about Esperanto. So, Jeremy, you're giving a public lecture. Tell us about that on Friday.
So this Friday at 7:30 at Cleveland State University in the Student Center in room 313 and 315. I'll be giving a talk which will be about the story of Lydia Zamenhof, the backstory of Esperanto in Cleveland, but particularly focusing on Lydia Zamenhof's visit and the tragic story of what happened to her.
Okay. And Amanda, let us know a bit about the conference that's happening. There's courses happening this week, but then conference extending at the beginning of next week.
So the conference is a 3-day conference over the weekend. So it's starting on Friday, and then we'll be ending on Monday with a post-conference excursion.
Is there a website people can go to find out about the conference?
Yes, so it's www.esperanto-usa.org.
Okay. And to answer the question, ask it one more time for us in Esperanto. Where can I find an inexpensive vegan restaurant?
Kie eblas trovi malmultekostan veganan restoracion?
Cleveland Vegan is in Lakewood. Can you say that in Esperanto for those who speak it?
Cleveland Vegan estas en Lakewood.
Okay, perfect. That was the easiest sentence today. Thank you very much for our panel being here with us today. Brandon Sowers, president of Esperanto USA, Amanda Schmidt, executive director of the organization, and Jeremy Genovese, Beechwood resident and member of Esperanto USA. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And what is it? It is Dankon, amigos.
Danke.
Yeah.
Net Duncan Day.
Thank you. Thank you very much.